And before this video begins, I'd just like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patrons, Chris Douglas and Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. Doctor Who Season 2 was great, until it wasn't. And no, I'm not talking about the one where Daleks invade Earth in a climactic story where the Doctor loses his close companion, or the other one where the Daleks invade Earth in a climactic story where the Doctor loses his close companion. Yes, Doctor Who's third Season 2, or more accurately Series 15, recently wrapped up and I have some very mixed feelings on it. Last year's Season 1 was very inconsistent and carried a lot of flaws with it. It introduced gods, mythology, and ended it all with a giant dog getting taken for a walk. After Season 1, I wasn't very optimistic about the follow-up. If it was going to be the same, I probably would have dipped from the show immediately, like I did with Pokemon once Black and White came out. Like, seriously, those suck. Luckily, it wasn't that case, at least not to start with. Season 2 sees Doctor Who, remember it's a sci-fi show, cartoons coming to life, cosmic horror entities 500,000 years in the future, space Eurovision, shrieks shrieking all over the place. It's much more sci-fi this time around. But does that make Season 2 better? Is Belinda Chandra better than Ruby Sunday? Has Russell T Davies finally remembered how to do good Doctor Who? Apart from the finale, well, but we'll get into that. As always, all these questions are what I'm here to answer. So, without any further ado, let's see what made Doctor Who Season 2 so good until it wasn't. An interesting thing to note is that Season 2 is more like Season 1 Part 2. Both seasons were filmed back to back and there's a lot of things carrying over, including Ruby straight up appearing multiple times to continue her story, and there is actually a theory out there that she was never actually supposed to leave. It's designed to be viewed as one big season, almost like how back in the day we used to actually get 13 episodes in each series. I will never forget those days. We didn't realise how good we had it, did we? It is interesting how Season 1 and Season 2 are basically identical in formula. Each episode, apart from the respective episode 5s, can be directly compared almost like a mirror. I mean, even literal shots are repeated, which is funny because everyone expected it to be relevant, like some conscious part of the story arc, but no, it really was just a coincidence, which is absolutely wild. Hell, we even have both actual arcs just being summed up as old woman shows up every week. Compelling stuff. I predicted a while back that Season 2 would be a lot more consistent and better than Season 1 due to the actors and production team growing more comfortable as a collective unit. And I was right, it is definitely more consistent. It almost makes me wish that Season 2 had come first, because it's a much more traditional, familiar Doctor Who that could have thrived with a high initial audience that usually comes with a new incarnation of the Doctor. It's more science fiction, more imaginative, and someone finally realised that they can up the saturation on the footage to make it look less dull. Considering Season 1 started with the absolutely abysmal but now unfortunately crucially important space babies, it's really no surprise that Season 2 serves as a much better introduction to Doctor Who. Season 1 was just kind of aimless wandering, which sure is the very spine of the show, but with only 8 episodes, 2 of which being parts of one story, it felt a little weak. Season 2 doesn't really have that issue though. The focus of the season is a journey to get reluctant new companion Belinda Chandra home, giving it a nice and organised structure of needing all these landings to calibrate a gadget, with the protagonist getting caught up in events every time, rather than just taking right back off again. Completely random landings like we see in The Well would have been nice, but we don't necessarily get that every time. Although I do like it for what it is. I've never liked when the Doctor has complete control over the TARDIS and can pilot it absolutely perfectly. I like the very classic Who-esque idea of just showing up somewhere and having to explore. This time, it's almost like a pseudo lack of control, because the Doctor can still pretty much land anywhere, just not the 25th of May 2025, the one time and place Belinda actually wants to get back to. So we have all these little adventures on their way home, and plenty of room for books and future Big Finish stories too. There's a nice range of settings. It almost makes you forget that half the season is still set in present day Britain. Ironically, Season 1 actually had more variety there. I also find it funny that they have the biggest and most expensive TARDIS ever, but they still never spend any time inside it, and the whole season is structured around not being able to use it. I still hate this TARDIS interior, by the way. Where's the character and the depth of it? The 12 Doctors were always clear, and we've just been regressing ever since. Much like this era, the 15th Doctor's TARDIS is all style, no substance. I still don't really know who the 15th Doctor is, or why I should care about him. He's an absolute mess of a character, which is funny because his whole thing is that he got therapy, so he isn't supposed to be as angsty or emotionally avoidant as the other New Who Doctors. In season 1, he was too emotionally vulnerable and cried that one singular dramatic tear no matter what happened. A planet could burn, or he could drop his toast jam side down, and he would have the same emotional reaction. Season 2 thankfully dials that down a little bit, although he definitely cries still too much and continues to devalue the moments where it should actually feel narratively justified. Something I appreciate season 2 at least trying to do though is showing his darker side. In season 1 he was very happy-go-lucky to the point it was a problem, but this time around we see episodes like Joy to the World seeing him manipulating Joy by brutally mocking her to break her conditioning. Then Lucky Day has him appear to give villain Conrad a dark spoiler of his own future death, and finally the Interstellar Song Contest has him straight up torture a guy because of his plan to kill 3 trillion people, which reminded the Doctor of Gallifrey being razed to the ground. Oh yeah, he's still last of the Time Lord, guys, because we're still stuck in 2005 apparently. I love the idea of incarnations growing darker over time. It was handled absolutely brilliantly with the 10th and 11th Doctors, but it doesn't have the same consistency with the 15th. He just goes from saying, "I'm healed and healthy now," to not facing any consequences for things like the aforementioned torture. I don't feel as though the Doctor really learns anything from this season. He doesn't grow or change compared to season 1. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor. I think he's very fun, but fun is usually the word you use when there isn't anything better or more insightful to say. He's enjoyable to watch, but the character feels so uneven. He's always slightly out of step with the tone of the scenes, and as I mentioned, nothing seems to change or develop with his character. The Interstellar Song Contest tried to give him something going on, but then it bungled it hard with a lack of consequences, and that's all we really get. The 15th Doctor feels like an afterthought in his own era. He's sandwiched between the soulless returns of 2 actors from the show's so-called golden era. He didn't get to face off against the Daleks or the Cybermen, both signs of legitimacy for an incarnation, and he didn't even get to own his own swan song. Since the 13th Doctor randomly pops in for a cameo, and then the episode buckles under the weight of this unnecessarily contrived plot and forced reshoots that literally happened about 3 months before the episode went out. Season 2 is the end of the road for the 15th Doctor, with a surprise regeneration at the end bringing a close to a very short-lived era that breaks the so-called 3-season rule, but not in the way we had all expected. This regeneration clearly wasn't planned. It was very obvious that Ncuti Gatwa wanted to be in the role for a long time, but something definitely changed earlier this very year, forcing them to hurriedly reshoot the ending of the reality war so he could leave the show. It's a huge mess, and I'll get into the show's future later on, but unfortunately, I feel like the 15th Doctor will barely have a legacy, because his time was so brief and turbulent. The 9th Doctor only had 13 episodes. They were dripping with character, confidence, and memorable, well-crafted moments. The 15th Doctor, on the other hand, only had 18 episodes, and so few of them have that same level of consistency and confidence. The Doctor's characterization just isn't there. I still don't know who he is. His writing is so tonally inconsistent. Gatwa is a good actor, but unfortunately the only really memorable characteristics of his Doctor are his sexuality and the amount of times he cries. Nothing else really is there. The 15th Doctor doesn't feel well-rounded or truly fleshed out, and it's a huge shame, because you can see flickers of an entertaining and compelling Doctor at times, but the writing just completely holds him back and almost flanderizes him in such a short span of time. The 15th Doctor was never really able to establish himself in the same way as so many others. Sure, he had lots of good moments scattered throughout, but season 2 still feels like very early days, only for him to already regenerate so soon. It's a season where he's clearly growing into the role and getting more comfortable, but because of how they filmed it back to back, it's a season where he's clearly still growing into the role, and yes, he's getting more comfortable, but the season focuses so much on things like lore, and these actual characters don't get the chance to shine or become powerful, impactful people we actually enjoy watching. Another character that really struggles is Belinda Chandra. Not for a want of trying, of course, since Varada Setu is a fantastic actor and has some shining moments in this season, but on a writing level there's a real lack of consistency and they really do her dirty, especially since she's absolutely fantastic in Andor, so it's clearly not a Varada problem. Now, I've always maintained the importance of having a good companion, because we spend so much time with the Doctor as a general character before each individual incarnation shows up, that a companion has to be brilliant to keep up with that kind of character who's already very established. Ruby Sunday didn't do this. She may look a bit like Clara, but she has a fraction of the charm, energy, and presence of Clara in even her worst episodes. Ruby was a bit of a flat character with no real development, personality, or sense of life. I wanted to enjoy her and the Doctor together, but there was a real lack of clashing personalities there because they got on too well. And then it turns out that Ruby is just boring in general, since she even gets a whole episode to herself in season 2, and remains the weakest and most forgettable part of it all. So compared to a dead-end character like Ruby, her successor was always going to be instantly more interesting, authentic, and memorable. And that's definitely true with Belinda, who has a fantastic introduction in the Robot Revolution. She's a bit older and more mature than Ruby. She's not a starry-eyed, naive teenager impressed by everything. She's a nurse, she works ungodly hours, loses family time, and at the end of the day, she just wants some goddamn sleep. But unfortunately, much like a lot of classic Who companions, her interesting character is established right at the start and then completely vanishes by the end. A big problem with this is that the writers, of whom there are thankfully a few more this time around, weren't even briefed on Belinda's character traits. They just knew the very basics, that she was a nurse, and obviously this means she becomes incredibly generic whenever she's not being written by the only one guy that knew who she was as a person. And even then at the end he just shuts her in a cupboard with a baby. We're gonna get to that. Like I said, Belinda starts off so well. She pushes back against the Doctor, calling out his recklessness and how dangerous he is. She tells him directly she won't be another one of his adventures, and even gets angry at him scanning her DNA without her permission, because he's convinced she's somehow special and linked to Mundy Flynn through destiny. It's a fantastic basis for a character in the modern era, especially considering how long it has actually been since a companion has clashed with the Doctor, and been reluctant to go on adventures. So that makes it all the more disappointing and frustrating when Belinda becomes so conformed and basic, especially with how quickly it happens. Even in just the second episode, she's a very normal character with a basic, interchangeable personality, although she does have a fantastic dress. By the end of the season, Belinda is far from the steadfast, grounded, and rational woman she began as. Instead, she's a completely neutered character who even overlooks the Doctor torturing kid in the Interstellar Song Contest. I mean, this is someone who expressly said she's scared of him in the first episode, but then just 5 episodes later, she says it again in the most slap on the wrist way possible. It's like, Doctor, you tortured that guy and went too far. And he goes, yeah, but I was sad. And then she basically replies saying, well, that's alright then. It's a ridiculous, fast, and completely unintentional character assassination of Belinda across the season, especially since in that same episode, a nurse side character is created for plot reasons, despite Belinda being right there as a nurse already. It is just painful. And of course, the season literally ends with her being shut in a cupboard and forgotten about for half the episode, before the Doctor then changes history to force her into a motherhood originally conceived by the literal villain of the season. It's, like I said, a complete character assassination, and it seems to really reinforce the idea that Belinda was never meant to exist at all, and was instead kind of shoehorned in as a replacement for Ruby for whatever reasons that may be. Because Belinda and her ending just makes no sense at all. Doctor Who Season 2 has a real character problem. There are really great ones with excellent villains like Lux and the Barber stealing the spotlight, but then you have so many bland, weak characters like the villain Alan or UNIT as a collective. Seriously, I hate this era's presentation of UNIT, but that's a video for another time. A big problem for the character shortcomings is simply how little time there is with any of them. Despite Doctor Who having the same episode length as it always has had, things just feel increasingly rushed and badly structured compared to episodes from 20 years ago. One of the most consistent complaints of every episode from Season 1 and Season 2 is it should have been a two-parter. I have seen that criticism of every single episode. And honestly, I can't even say they're wrong. Some of these episodes are such great ideas with really weak execution in the end. Most of the episodes have a very simple structure with maybe 3 sets and a lot of talking and exposition. I guess because they expect everyone to be on their phone, they have to explain everything multiple times. 8 episodes just isn't enough for a satisfying series of Doctor Who. We have a companion introduction, a Dr. Light episode, and then the finale, leaving only 4 normal episodes. There's no room for an atmospheric, slow burn, incredible story like The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit. Hell, it doesn't even feel like there's enough room for frivolous, comparatively low stakes adventures like Unicorn and the Wasp. Everything is constantly running at 100 miles per hour without ever even having the action to justify it. The season has a much more distinct Doctor Who identity than season 1. It's less fixated on gods and magic, but it still feels like it's trying to be something it's not. Doctor Who isn't some big budget, Marvel-esque, high concept show. 8 episodes is far too short for what Doctor Who should be. That is unless they're a classic Who or Sarah Jane Adventures style format. But that's a conversation I don't think people are quite ready for yet. The politics are also a big downside of season 2. Not the fact that they exist, but how they're handled. Other channels like J-Boy and Council of Geeks have explored this much better than I ever could. But the show keeps trying to make political statements without the actual quality or skill to pull it off in a profound way like it tries to attempt. And the weird inconsistent politics are best summed up by one of our 3 big bads, Conrad Clark. Conrad is evil. Why? Just because. Yes, as explored in Lucky Day, Conrad is a pathological liar who met the Doctor when he was a child and then grew up determined to disprove aliens and expose UNIT as fake, stealing taxpayer money. It's a great idea, if only the episode didn't treat UNIT as some sweet uwu cinnamon roll incapable of getting criticised in any form. Conrad goes through Lucky Day as a villain you would expect in a dedicated UNIT spin-off show. He's just a guy with a podcast and apparently a secret society completely unrelated, making you wonder what the podcast was actually for. He gets arrested and he has this confrontation with the Doctor in the end, and then the season decides it's time for him to suddenly be a finale-level villain as a 1984-esque dictator of a totalitarian regime full of conservative values. Hey, it only took 20 years, but Russell T Davies finally gave us an original character as the villain of a finale. It's the incredibly imaginative, groundbreaking sci-fi concept of a guy. I am, of course, being facetious, but there is a genuine issue with the finale lineup, since it's yet another Davies finale that relies upon a returning villain. Twice in this case, since we have the Rani and Omega, who is now a giant CGI skeleton. Yeah mate, I'll get to you in a minute, just wait your turn. Mrs. Flood is a character introduced right at the start of the 15th Doctor's era as Ruby Sunday's neighbour, before taking on a very villainous tint in the season 1 finale and continuing to break the fourth wall in that classic Rani tradition. You know, it's her iconic trademark feature. Indeed, Mrs. Flood's big reveal is that she is the Doctor's old enemy from the 80s, you know, 2 of the worst stories. She is the Rani, a Time Lord obsessed with scientific progress and conducting unethical and morally bankrupt experiments. Mrs. Flood does none of this. But thankfully, after she bijonates into the Rani, the finale at least tries to maintain some character consistency, rather than just being a whole new character with a familiar name, like Sutekh and like Omega. I still don't think Mrs. Flood was actually intended to be the Rani when they started out, but that's what we ended up with, and the finale completely fumbles her. Archie Punjabi's take on the character is interesting. At times, she is fun to watch, even if sometimes she does trade too close to Sarah Jane Adventures villain technology. Territory. There's a vague attempt at staying faithful to her unethical scientist, classic Who, eugenicist characterization, but she basically does nothing, and then she gets eaten by Omega. Wow, what a great return! I remember the famous moment when the Master returned, and then immediately got eaten by rotten pineapple Rassilon. Yeah, look at me reusing a joke. That's what happens when I rush these videos. Yeah, this season builds to the return of the Rani in the finale, which then itself just serves to reveal Omega as the true big bad. But Omega doesn't have anything to do with the original Classic Who character. Instead of an intriguing, layered and maniacal Time Lord wanting revenge and to be appreciated and worshipped, he's now a giant CGI skeleton that wants to eat Time Lords and then eat the world or something. Genuinely, what's the point in bringing a character back if you're going to change everything about them? I think the Rani and this imposter Omega are the personification of Doctor Who's recent obsession with surface level nostalgia and lore. It's something I plan on making a whole video about, but we're currently in an era that seems to constantly try to reinvent the show in a very forced way, relying on shocks, storylines and cliffhangers that generate content. Suddenly Doctor Who isn't about what wacky adventures the Doctor will get into. It's always now about the character's past, Gallifrey, the Time Lords, who people are and how they got there. And for some reason making everything meta, like turning Doctor Who into a TV show within the universe and constantly making obscure references and relying on characters and villains people don't know or care about. Sutekh was a bizarre big bad in season 1 because he comes from one story back in the 70s and it's meant to be a big deal that he comes back, even though they have to literally sit down with BBC iPlayer and explain him to us. The Rani and Omega are much the same in season 2, treated as huge deals despite being villains from just 2 stories in Classic Who. And the Rani wasn't even in good ones. If a character is that old and to the casual audience obscure, you have to treat them like they're a brand new character now being introduced. Russell T Davies might know and care a lot about these characters, but Peter Schmidt from down the road doesn't know nor care about them. You can't just have the Rani pop up and write Mel into the story for the pure purpose of saying, oh look, it's the Rani, because only terminally online fans like me actually know why that's a big deal. It's like how AEW has some guy show up and the writers expect you to already care just because the hardcore fans worship his match against Glorpus Snorpus at Trouble in Tonga 2004. So it doesn't actually reintroduce him to anyone that hasn't studied Cage Match. Season 2 just has such a big issue with things like that. The Fugitive Doctor has a random cameo in Storing the Engine for no reason. The Midnight Entity is shoehorned into the world because they changed the original plan, so it's just there as a return for the sake of having a return. And of course, there's Susan randomly showing up in the Interstellar Song Contest as more member berries, sowing the seeds of a narrative they then cut out of the finale, therefore rendering her appearances completely pointless. God forbid if you're new to this show. The biggest problem with Doctor Who right now is that there isn't a plan, or if there is, it's not a good one. Despite reintroducing the show in 2005 as a fresh start which only gradually reintroduced elements of lore and history, Russell T Davies' second stint has become obsessed with itself. David Tennant coming back, Catherine Tate coming back, the Midnight Entity, the whole production team from the good old days, and finally Billie Piper coming back suggests an unwillingness to move on. It's a complete mess that forgot Doctor Who is at its best when it's just a good sci-fi show with telling interesting stories, not this shadow of its former self. It feels overly manufactured and so soulless. It's all about that idea of generating content and making social media headlines, rather than it just being interesting science fiction. The show is in both creative and commercial limbo right now. Davies can claim all he wants that this was the plan from the beginning, but so many elements of this new era feel like wild flailing and waiting to pivot at the last minute. Storylines are hinted at and seeded without a payoff that makes sense. Characters exist and feel like their whole entire purpose changes late on. Mrs. Flood becoming the Rani is purely a shock moment that ends up not actually making much sense or coming across as an actual plan. Belinda feels like a last minute rewrite of Ruby. It's just all style and no substance with no clear end goal. There's so much tonal and narrative inconsistency, and now we've found ourselves in a situation where the show might not even end up returning in 2 years' time. So we might be stuck on an eternal cliffhanger where the Doctor is replaced by an actor who left the show 20 years ago, just because it's a shocking moment. There's a lack of consequences, a lack of effort, and a real lack of heart in this era. It feels almost irresponsible. This regeneration was added really late, and Billie Piper is practically photoshopped into the final shot. There's no Christmas special. Season 3 hasn't been commissioned, let alone filmed. The ending of the reality war clearly wasn't the plan, so they instead decided to stick in this twist just for the sake of it, playing coy about who Billie Piper is playing, meaning they probably don't even know right now. Where does the show go from here? I don't think anyone even knows, and not to be too doom and gloom, but we very well could be facing a season 27 scenario where they just never tell us Doctor Who is done with, and we just keep waiting. They keep dropping hints that there are plans, even though internally there are none. You know, it is doom and gloom, but we've had the casting director of the last 20 years leave the day I record this video, so it's not looking good for the future. As I mentioned at the beginning, Doctor Who Season 2 is great. until it isn't. It starts off as a really refreshing return to norm with strong RTD1-esque stories like The Robot Revolution, Lux, and The Well, a really promising opening salvo making things so thrilling, compelling, and enjoyable to watch. But then the momentum really starts to slow down. Story in the Engine is great, but sandwiched in between, in my opinion, two very weak episodes. Then the finale is just another typical weak Russell T Davies slopfest with way too much of a reliance on lore and nostalgia, culminating in the most absolutely backwards facing reveal in the show's entire history. In terms of production, acting, ideas, and writing, Season 2 is still a marked improvement over Season 1, Series 13, Series 12, and Series 11, but it can't escape a lot of the same issues that plagued the previous seasons. The companion is still disappointing and bland, even if not as bland this time, and acted a lot better if just let down by the writing. The story arc is the exact same, just a woman showing up every week, although at least this time there's the arc about getting Belinda home as well. The episodes are still paced pretty unevenly, but they at least look a lot better visually. It's a very nice looking season. It actually feels like Doctor Who at a lot of points, rather than some strange sci-fantasy show about gods and magic. It managed to capture the cultural zeitgeist twice with Mr. Ring-a-Ding and our Lord and Saviour Dug-a-Doo, proving Doctor Who can be culturally relevant still, even if the politics are still all over the place and at times very outdated and very out of touch. The biggest problem with Season 2 is the same that has kneecapped the last few Doctor Who series. It's just too short, and there's no clear plan. As much as Russell T Davies advises us to watch Season 1 and 2 as one big season, they're still two individual seasons of only 8 episodes. It is not enough time with these characters, and for these adventures, so the quality severely suffers as a result. There's less time to develop characters, explore locations, and establish an arc. So many issues with Season 2 could be fixed if there was just more time, and a lot less nostalgia baiting. Doctor Who doesn't need to be a cannibalistic Ouroboros eating itself alive with lore and overly complex plots. It just needs to be a fun journey through time and space with endearing and engaging characters. A show primed to appeal to all audiences, but especially to children. Yet this current era is aimed at people with a nostalgic fondness for the past, so children aren't watching in droves anymore. The show no longer has a sustainable, repeatable success. It's a fading star trying to coast by on past relevance despite the world having moved on. It's 2025 Katy Perry. Doctor Who Season 2 is definitely an improvement over Season 1, but it's far from perfect. So regardless of how terrible the finale is, I think it still suits a C+, B- grade. It is so good until it's not. It's so hard to reconcile the series and then the finale as being part of the same thing. But on the majority, it is at least watchable, even if it is the last new Doctor Who product I will review until Russell T Davies leaves. But with all that said, what do you think of Season 2? Let me know in the comments, and let me know if you got a hard bingo this week. Come on, Duncan, one last time. Let's do this. Yippee!
Ooh, that's a bingo!
As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one, when we do some more Doctor Who, but just no more reviews. It's over, and then eventually I'll just be doing whatever I want. So join me for the ride. Bye-bye. And I'd just like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patrons, Chris Douglas and Fallon Cortez, my Platinum level patron, Matthew Burns, and all my Gold level patrons, Ben Salmon, Daniel Shillito, and James Aluya Waterhouse. Thank you so much for your support.